Hi, welcome to Vaping Prevention Messages That Work, Part 2, COVID-19 edition. My name is Jeff Jordan, President and Executive Creative Director at Rescue Agency, one of the leading agencies fighting teen vaping across the nation. And today, I'm here to share with you some of the latest changes in how the COVID-19 crisis has affected the pandemic that we had before that, which was teen vaping. Today, we're going to be talking about changes in teen vaping behaviors, changes in teen vaping knowledge and attitudes, and changes in how teens are reacting to vaping prevention messages. The data I'm going to share with you today is both from right before the COVID-19 crisis happened to during the COVID-19 crisis. We were able to complete focus group research with 86 teens right before the crisis, and then during the crisis, we transitioned our research to online interviews, and we're able to interview an additional 46 teens. This research occurred across 4 different states in diverse parts of the country. Roughly half of these teens were current users of vaping products. That means they had vaped in the past 30 days. And the other half were non-users but susceptible users. What does that mean is that in surveys, they responded that they would be open to vaping in the near future. First, let's talk about changes in teen vaping behaviors. In order to look at teen vaping behaviors, we divided up our teens into 2 groups. First, we looked at how experimentation has changed and how regular use has changed. For teens that were not regular users, this means that they had used less than 100 times in their life, they were occasional users, they had recently started. What we have seen is that their use has decreased since quarantine and COVID-19 crisis began. Why has this happened? Well, there have been fewer peer interactions to cause vaping to occur. They have less access to vapes now that they're not around their peers who used to provide the vapes for these experimenters. There's also more parental supervision with many parents not working and being at home or working from home. What we've also seen is that since vaping previously a social activity for these teens, the reduction in social interactions and social occasions has also just reduced their impulses to use or their occasions to use. They're also telling us that sellers have actually increased their prices, making it harder for these teens to acquire vapes on the black market. And very encouragingly, we've heard that teens are using this time to reflect on why they started vaping in the first place. Fortunately, many of these teens are not yet experiencing addiction, and so they are able to kind of stop vaping and think about, well, what was it that motivated them to start vaping in the first place? And many of them are noticing that they were just doing it because everyone around them was doing it, and that wasn't really a good reason to take on a risky behavior. So many of these teens are choosing to no longer vape. Now, we don't know if this will actually continue to be this way when they go back to school and go back into their peer environments, but at least for now, within quarantine, many of these experimenter teens are choosing to reduce their current vaping. Here's what a couple of them had to say. I'm not using right now because I'm not hanging out with people. When I'm hanging out with people, let's say my friends or something, I'm gonna take a hit of their vape every once in a while, just to kind of blend in with people. Another teen user said, they're way marked up from what they were before the quarantine, but that's because there's a lot of risk getting those. So kids who are selling them are going to sell them for a lot more right now. Remember, these teens are underage and it's illegal for them to buy vapes. So when they get their vapes, they're usually acquiring it from a black market source. And what they're telling us is that those prices have gone up. Now, different from our experimenters who have used less than 100 times in their life are regular users, teens who have used more than 100 times in their life that are vaping more frequently. And what we're hearing from these teens is that their vaping use seems to have gone up during quarantine. That's right, the opposite of what we're seeing with experimenters is regular users are vaping more. And what are they telling us is that boredom and from these fewer social interactions is actually increasing their use of vaping because they have nothing else to do, so they think more about it. They're also coping with stressors of being home. Some of these teens tend to be higher risk. There tend to be more reasons for them to be turning to substances to cope with different things that are going on in their life. There's also possible accelerations in addiction as boredom has caused them to do the behavior more often. So what began as boredom accelerating use has then resulted in a stronger addiction that is then further accelerating use even more. We're also seeing that initially, access was hard for these teens, but that because it was important for them to continue vaping, they were able to quickly find new sources of vapes to buy them from older peers and seem to have stabilized the market for them. In addition, what we're seeing is that a lot of these teens are using Snapchat to actually buy vapes. So teens are posting on their Snapchat account, older teens are posting on their Snapchat accounts that they have vapes available for sale, and then that is how they're connecting. And it's essentially like a little bit of an Uber Eats or a Postmates of vaping is what these teens are reporting. Let's see exactly what they had to say. People have started vaping more. They have a lot more free time. Since everything is shut down, they don't really have anything to do. Basically, everybody just sits at home in their PJs and vapes and smokes. It's basically a hobby. Another teen user said, I know that people are like texting seniors, and seniors can drive, and they'll drive to their house and they'll just like go to their door, and that's how it kind of works now for accessing vapes. And one more user said, I tried to quit 3 times. It's not easy, but it's not difficult. The peer pressure gets you back on. Everyone is doing it, so I hop back on and start again. Usually talking about seeing their friends use online or when they do have a chance to hang out with their friends. A few other changes that we've observed in behavior is that there seems to have been a huge shift from Juul. This trend began before quarantine and seems to have accelerated during the COVID-19 crisis. Teens seem to be shifting to disposables like puff bars because they are lower costs. They seem to be easier to access for them, and they reportedly have a lot better flavors for teens. And if you look at some of the names of these flavors, you can tell why. This brand and these flavors undoubtedly are targeted toward teen users. Some also claim that disposables provide a stronger buzz from the nicotine in them. We don't have any scientific information about why this might be, but it is something that we are hearing across multiple states. And finally, we're hearing that teens are open to changing as flavors get banned and new flavors, possibly illegal ones, pop up on the market. So while our states are working hard on flavor bans and we're seeing the reduction of teen flavors from kind of national brands, it's these kind of smaller brands that are popping up and grabbing the teen market, which is a problem. It's maintaining a lot of teen use. Let's hear from one teen had to say. Right now, the popular thing in my area are puff bars. I think a lot of people switched over to those during the Corona thing. They post about it in their stories. Since a lot of people can't leave their house, there are kids in my grade that have taken upon themselves to sell them. And the puff bars are cheaper than the regular ones because they're so disposable. So that's what we've seen in terms of teen vaping behaviors and how those behaviors have changed during COVID. Now the question is, how have teens changed the way they think about vaping? Specifically, their changes in vaping attitudes and knowledge. First, we've seen that there's an increased awareness of chemicals and the risks associated with vaping. Most teens no longer think that vapes are harmless. There's an acknowledgement of the chemicals in vapes and the harmful effects of those chemicals. One consequence that we have heard a lot about in our research is popcorn lung seems to have popped up a lot in our various interviews and focus groups. In addition, they have associated the risks of vaping with both nicotine and THC-based vapes. We know that EVALI in late 2019 was a big crisis in public health, and it was primarily associated with THC vapes, but teens are also becoming aware of the risks associated with just regular nicotine vapes from stores and from reputable brands. One thing that teens seem to be noticing in their own lives and of the lives of their friends is reduced athletic performance from vaping. This seems to be the most commonly personally experienced consequence and the most believable consequence because they are seeing it so much. And finally, we're hearing from teens that the formaldehyde is now a well-known ingredient of vapes and is one that they talk about often. Let's hear about what a couple teens had to say. I know that they aren't good for breathing. It's hard to breathe sometimes, especially during sports and stuff. And I know that it can give you popcorn lung and everything, stuff like that, said one teen user. Another teen user said, vaping is definitely damaging your health. It's just not good for you. There's a lot of chemicals you're inhaling. You just really don't know what's going into your body, so I feel like it's pretty obvious that it's bad for you. And some of these changes in attitudes have caused teens to reconsider their use. Some teens have reduced their use, have tried to quit, and some have avoided starting again. One thing we heard a lot about is nick sick, which is the commonly known phrase for when teens actually get sick from inhaling too much nicotine in a short period of time. Common symptoms for nick sick include the feeling of throwing up, headache, nausea, and abdominal pain. However, even though this is a short-term deterrent for some teens, many are reporting that they learn from the experience and simply learn how to not inhale too much nicotine so that they don't get sick. But some of these experiences can be pretty traumatizing, as one teen shared with us. He said, "I think one of the things that really got me was when I threw up the very first time at school because of it. We were in PE, so we had to run. And we were just in the gym running, and I threw up for 15 minutes. Just feeling like I'm dying. It's the worst feeling ever. You feel so sick. It's just like you're about to throw up, but then you don't, and then your head hurts, and you're sweaty, and you're gross." Being sick sounds terrible. And it is a term that we're hearing teens use, and it is something that seems to be pretty common with teens across the country. We've also seen changes in addiction knowledge and perceptions. Most teens are now aware that vapes are addictive, but they believe that they are in control of that potential addiction. However, they notice signs of addiction emerge, and that begins to slowly change their attitude. Teens tend to come to terms with the fact that they are addicted to vaping when they try to quit and are not able to. So it's kind of like a denial that addiction is even possible until they can't deny it anymore because they were not able to quit. Non-users are seeing others getting addicted, and it's deterring their use. Nic breaks is something that's used to fight addiction, but are triggered to restart. So essentially, teens who are noticing that they're getting addicted try to take a break from vaping for a week to try and suppress that addiction, prevent themselves from getting addicted, but then the social influences that caused their vaping in the first place trigger them to restart, and again restart on the addiction. So there seems to be this tension between the desire not to get addicted by many teens, this sense that they're strong enough to get addicted, to not get addicted, but then the feeling that they might if they vape too much, and then the social pressures to vape. A very complicated set of influences that seem to be pushing and pulling teens from vaping and non-vaping. Here's what a couple teens had to say about that. "I don't really let myself do it too much because I knew I would get addicted. And if I did do it, it would be days where it's like you think about it a lot. It's really, really easy to get addicted." Another teen said, "I think I would stop for a week or two, but then I think there was just juniors that I was friends with, and I'm a freshman, so it's kind of like an honor being friends with the juniors and the seniors. They really did see me as one of their friends, and it wasn't just being used. They were kind of like, hey, we're gonna go do this, we're gonna go vape. Do you wanna hang out with us?" And so a lot of teens felt that pressure to continue vaping. One more thing that we noticed is that there were a lot of COVID-specific changes in attitudes. And it makes sense. COVID is primarily a virus that affects your lungs, and vaping affects your lungs. And so there are things that are making them think. In particular, teens seem to be more aware of lung health since the COVID-19 crisis started, and about the negative health effects of vaping. So they're putting the dots together, saying, hey, my lungs are important to overcome diseases like COVID-19. Facts about lung immunity and virus infections are highly relevant and powerful right now for teens to not start vaping, reduce the amount that they're vaping, or quit altogether. Many teens are currently reconsidering their vaping use, and are open to changing their minds about vapes. Here's what a couple teens had to say. "I think that vaping can affect your breathing, and so that can lead to, if you get the coronavirus, then that can have some problems." Another teen describing an ad that focused on immunity said, "I like this one. It kind of made it seem more real, especially I don't personally worry about the coronavirus because it doesn't attack people my age as badly, but it makes it more personal. It could affect me if I had been vaping, and it would compromise my immune system." So there's a huge opportunity to talk to teens about what they're seeing in the news, what lung health is, and how vaping affects that lung health, even if we're not necessarily talking specifically about COVID-19, but just lung health overall. Now that we know how these behaviors have changed and what some of the attitude changes have been, the important question is, well then what should we say? How can we take advantage of this time, this changing times, and this reconsidering of vaping that's going on amongst teens to help them decide that vaping is not for them? First, anything about lung health is currently very, very powerful. Teens are thinking about their lungs, they're seeing how lung health is affecting thousands and thousands of Americans, and they want their lungs to be healthy. Consequences they have already experienced, like shortness of breath and athletic performance, are going to be powerful to talk about because there's no skepticism about it. Either they have experienced it or they've seen their friends experience it. So this is something that you can leverage in order to have an honest conversation with teens about what's really happening and not make them feel like you're trying to use scare tactics against them. Another thing we're noticing is that there should be a reduced focus on some overly talked about chemicals like formaldehyde. Teens seem to already be aware that these are in vapes, and it gives us an opportunity to talk about other chemicals that they don't quite know about, possibly like arsenic or lead that can be found in vapes, or maybe like how it is that metal particles are found in vapor. And then finally, teens are placing a greater value on their health in general. Take advantage of it, use it. Teens care about their health right now. Educate them about what it means to be vape-free and why that's critical for their health. So let me show you a couple of messages that we tested that teens found particularly powerful. So let me show you a couple ads that tested particularly well from our Behind the Haze campaign, which is what we call a ready-made campaign to fight teen vaping. What does that mean exactly? Well, Behind the Haze is a national campaign that is implemented locally by different states and local counties that's based on multi-state formative research that's obviously ongoing. As you can see, this research is continuing to inform the campaign as it evolves. It delivers evidence-based messaging that's based on these ongoing focus groups and interviews with teens themselves, as well as outcomes from the states that are already implementing the campaign. And the ads that it offers are completely pre-made, pre-tested, and ready to implement. That means forget about 6 to 12-month periods of building a campaign. Behind the Haze is developed, it's tested, and it's ready to implement within a month. All of these ads are field tested, and there's a growing library of what we call message packages that any state or community can choose to implement in the order, frequency, and length that they desire. Essentially, Behind the Haze is a ready-to-go vaping prevention campaign that can help teens in your community immediately begin to reduce their teen vaping rates at a fraction of what it costs to make an original campaign. So we have a growing library of content that you can see online on the Behind the Haze website or on the Rescue website, but I'm gonna focus on two of the newest ads that we just finished earlier this year and that we were able to test in these focus groups with teens. The first ad is called Chemical Warfare. Let's take a look.
The lungs have a foamy looking appearance. There's a chemical burn in the airways. The injuries look like those seen in people exposed to poisons like mustard gas.
I'm actually not talking about war. That's how doctors are describing what they see in the lungs of vapors.
The chemicals can essentially burn your lungs. Find the truth about vapes' toxic chemicals at behindthehaze.com.
Chemical Warfare scored extremely well amongst teens. They really appreciated the powerful imagery, the warlike imagery. To them, it connected to some of the things that they're learning at school about World War II, about how poisons were used, etc. So it was a really powerful analogy for them. And they understood what it meant. They really like seeing the lung x-rays. They saw that as real evidence, and those lung x-rays came from the actual studies that this ad is based on. They also like seeing the doctor. That added a lot of credibility. So it was really nice for them to hear from a peer talking, but to see the doctor in the background and to know that that information was coming from a medical source. And interestingly, we finished this ad before the COVID crisis began. So we were really curious during this research to see if it would trigger, either in a positive or in a negative way, anything about COVID or anything about mask wearing, about all of these things that are going on. And none of the teens that we interviewed about this ad actually brought up COVID organically when discussing the ad. But when we did ask them about it, they simply said that yes, this ad would be even more powerful now because everyone is so aware of their lungs. So we didn't really see any unintended consequences from the visuals in this ad and the current COVID-19 crisis. So here's what some of the teens had to say. Overall, I think war was a good aspect to bring up because war is a tragedy. And a lot of people know about World War II and mustard gas, and they like seeing that analogy with vaping. Another teen user said, very serious, very informative. I like the way he showed the evidence. Strict, straightforward evidence. This is something we hear from teens all the time. Don't try and exaggerate, just give the exact facts. And they really appreciate when you do, and they love it when you show your sources, because that shows them that you're not afraid of them doing more research. You put it all out there, you say, this is a fact, go look it up yourself and learn from it and act based on it. And one other teen said, this one really grabbed my attention in the beginning, and I definitely paid attention to it a lot. It's like the way it compares to two things, war and vaping, that was really, really strong. Overall, the ad had a 4.02 perceived effectiveness score. Now, what's that? The perceived effectiveness scale is a 6-item index that calculates the likely effectiveness of an ad based on how teens answer this series of questions that asks about whether the ad is worth remembering, it got their attention, it was powerful, meaningful to them, convincing, and informative. The scale is used by the CDC and the FDA to predict the future effectiveness of their campaigns, and it's a 5-point scale, so anything above a 3.0 is considered effective. So a 4.05 score is something that is exceptionally high, telling us that this ad would likely be extremely effective at changing vaping behaviors amongst teens wherever it's implemented. The next ad that we tested is called Defenseless, and this was made right after the COVID-19 crisis started. Let's take a look.
We're surrounded by viruses. If you're young and healthy, most don't pose a threat. But if you vape, you could be breaking down your body's ability to defend itself. The chemicals in vapor, like propylene glycol, glycerol, and metal particles, damage your lungs on a cellular level. And that damage in here leaves you at risk to the viruses out there. Get the sick truth about vaping at BehindTheHaze.com.
Defenseless also scored extremely well, a 3.93 perceived effectiveness score, nearly the same one as chemical warfare. And what teens really liked about this ad was, first of all, many of them commented on how much they liked the animated style. It felt older, it felt like serious with the colors and the tones and the way that it was done. They also really loved seeing the path of the germ. They thought that that was so timely for what's going on today, to exactly see how it is that a germ can travel from one's mouth to someone else's lungs, and how it is that within the lungs, vaping are reducing the immunity and the defenses that lungs naturally have, making it more susceptible to all kinds of viruses. They said that this message is necessary right now, today. They were pretty much telling their interviewers, you should be airing this ad right now, because teens would share it, would talk about it, and would take action on it. And it did remind them of the COVID-19 crisis, but in a good way. It reminded them that they needed to protect their lung health, and that being vape-free is a critical part of that. And that's something that all of us in public health want to see teens thinking about and talking about. Here's what a couple teens had to say. I think it's a really good ad to screen now amidst a pandemic. A lot of people are concerned about their own physical health and safety. So explaining how vaping affects you, it would be motivating to a lot of people to quit. Another teen said, that one definitely made me think of COVID very quickly. I think that was a really, really good ad. I think that a lot of kids, even me, think about COVID and like, oh, we're young. Obviously, we don't want to give it to any of our family members, but I'm sure that if I get it, I'd be fine. I think that's something that kids would really find really scary, and a big incentive to stop vaping, because they don't want to compromise their own lungs and then get a virus on top of that. So these two message packages performed extremely well and are now a part of the Behind the Haze package and available to any client that is using the Behind the Haze brand. Each of these come with a complete package of all the assets and elements needed to run a modern campaign. What does that mean? A 30-second TV and web commercial in both horizontal and vertical formats, 15 seconds versions of those commercials, over 20 social media and digital ads that go along with the commercial to use over the course of the time when the campaign is running, including digital ads, search ads, promoted posts, etc. A comprehensive website at BehindTheHaze.com, and implementation tactics and strategies, including audience profiles of where to target this ad, etc. So let's talk about how it works. Communities essentially purchase licenses to the Behind the Haze message packages for use in their own community. They can purchase some or all of the licenses, and they can go at their own pace, whichever ad they want to air first, second, third. Then, they receive an implementation strategy that is customized based on their own local budget, their own audience, their own geographic area, etc. The entire implementation plan is custom to the local community. So essentially, you're learning from possibly a dozen other communities that have used the same tactics and have been able to refine them over time. Next, the campaign is launched. And during that launch, feedback from that campaign informs continuous improvements of the campaign for other additional clients, as well as for future messages that are developed as part of Behind the Haze. Finally, new content is developed for the next ad campaign and made available to all the clients currently using Behind the Haze. So what this means, it's kind of like this conveyor belt of ads that are continuously ready to go based on evidence tested with the audience that you can use in your community at your own pace based on the messages that you want to focus on. It's just a library of content ready to go. Forget about 6 to 12 months of creating campaigns. You can be up and running within 4 weeks with the Behind the Haze campaign. The implementation channels and the assets are available for all of the top channels that teens are using, including Instagram, Snapchat, YouTube, etc., as well as TV and radio ads for traditional media and digital ads. All of it stemming to the website, which you can actually use the National Behind the Haze website, or it can lead to your own website. And in addition, if you wanted to, you could actually rebrand all of the content for your own campaign. So if you weren't running the Behind the Haze brand, you could add your own logo and brand to the ads so that it fit with your existing vaping prevention campaign. Probably the most powerful part of Behind the Haze, though, is that you join a community of collaboration. With over a dozen states using content from Behind the Haze as a part of their teen vaping prevention efforts, you're using a community that is sharing resources, research, and tactics from their implementations with each other to be more efficient and effective with the funds that they have. Why spend money reinventing the wheel when you can actually pay a fraction of the price and use evidence-based, pre-tested content to ensure that your campaign reaches as many teens as possible in your community? That's what Behind the Haze offers. And now we're proud to introduce Defenseless and Chemical Warfare as the 2 newest message packages available to the Behind the Haze customers. For more information on how to join the Behind the Haze collaboration or to learn more about our vaping prevention strategies, please visit rescueagency.com. Thank you so much for listening, and please stay safe.